What's up, everyone? It's your boy Ash here, and recently the final content update for Sonic Frontiers released, and I, of course, plan to talk about it on this channel one way or another eventually, but I didn't expect it to be so soon because I was working on some other stuff, and I didn't think it was necessarily a major priority to talk about this DLC so soon after released. But here's the thing, I haven't been able to think about anything else for the past few days, and instead of letting that excitement and all these thoughts just go away, I decided it'd be probably a better idea to just sit down, record this, edit it as soon as possible, and just release it, just so I can get this kind of like more emotional heat of the moment sort of reaction, instead of having to go back and remember what did I think about all of this again, because that usually leads to a less exciting video to make for me, and possibly a less interesting video for y'all to watch. Of course, this DLC main intention behind this update, at least from what we could gather before it came out and what the developers have said and stuff, was that it was gonna basically fix the ending that we got for the original base game. The game in general received a little bit of a mixed reaction. I personally loved it. I have my own reasons for it. You can watch. I made a whole 40-minute video essay as to why I enjoyed that game. But if you want the long and short version of it, basically, this game has a lot of flaws. It is kind of unfinished in a lot of ways ever since the base game, but it left its mark on me, a very, very, very positive mark on me, and it made me happy more so than many other better, more polished games ever did. And to me, that's more valuable than any kind of arbitrary quality signifier possibly ever could. It's just a very fun game with insanely cool boss fights, amazing music, a good Sonic story for once. It's been a while. It's kind of a little bit rougher on the edges, but the ideas here are so solid, and the game itself is just so fun to mess around with. It's so fun to play, and it's just such a memorable little experience that no matter how unpolished it is, at the end of the day, I just really enjoy it, and it really left a positive impression on me, so I really do enjoy it a lot. But one of the things the game really lacked was the sort of a decent ending, I suppose, because the ending of the original Sonic Frontiers, it's a bit lacking. Personally, I think it conceptually is really good. Spoilers for Sonic Frontiers. Spoilers for the whole DLC, by the way. This whole video is gonna be spoiler-filled, so finish the whole game, finish the DLC if you don't want to get spoiled or anything. So the original ending, I believe, was very thematically interesting. The end is a very cool final boss, and the monologue it gives out, it's just very, very threatening, very cool. And the whole vibe kind of reminded me a bit of like Kirby final bosses, the way they usually have like a really insane, godlike being and all that stuff. Kirby does it a lot, weirdly enough, but other games do it too, and Sonic, of course, being a little more edgy, a little bit more anime, especially now that it's returned to that style in Frontiers. It works really well conceptually, and Sage's character arc, for as many little awkward cutscenes that one specific montage most people cringed at, is, at least, like, again, in the text, at least conceptually, a good character. Her relationship with Eggman is very touching, and again, just the fact that they went back and tried to actually make character arcs, input feelings into the story to just, make it a little bit more in-depth, a little bit more interesting than what Sonic has been recently. I feel like that already goes a very, very long way in making this game more memorable. All that conceptually was pretty good, but the end final boss originally, the big issue with it was that gameplay-wise, it was a little bit of just a stupid little mini game. Like, personally, I don't mind the final boss itself being a different gameplay style necessarily. Kirby has done it a lot. Again, Kirby, as I mentioned before, does this kind of final boss a lot better than this game, honestly, and it's awesome there. These final bosses in that series are so fucking kick-ass and awesome, and they usually explore a somewhat different gameplay style there, including shoot-em-ups. They've done shoot-em-ups, they love them, they're shoot-em-ups. But in the case of Sonic Frontiers, it just kind of felt very rushed. You could see the holes in the scripts and where it seemed like they cut corners. But that was that. The game was still pretty great. Then recently, not so recently, but then a little later on, they announced that they would make a few updates to the game that would improve on the issues people were complaining about and make it actually a really polished, complete Sonic game, or at least that's what we were promised. And in a way, kind of did that, but also not really, because the first update was a few extra modes. Boss Rush, really fun. Cyberspace Rush was also really fun. Ultra difficult mode was kind of bullshit, but hey, it was an excuse to replay the game, and I guess it's now a little bit more difficult, but it's more frustrating than anything. Whatever. Second update added momentum physics, more or less, kind of. Really good. Really enjoy replaying the entire game with those new physics. They also added the spin dash, which really fun to mess around with. I cannot go back to this game without the spin dash now. I'm always doing New Game Plus from now on, so I can keep the spin dash unlocked because it's just really fun to mess around it. And the third update promised to actually fix the ending. Mario Kishimoto, the game's director, has been on Twitter, and he's been seeing all the criticisms and responding to all the criticisms people have been making about the game, and openly taking notes so he could improve it for this final update. And that was kind of the whole idea going in, that he was going to fix the ending and fix the whole thing where it felt a little bit too rushed, where it felt kind of very freaking rushed. It was absolutely noticeably rushed. And fix that to make it a little more complete, or at least that's what it seemed like they were doing. It's not really that. Okay, let's get into it actually. So the new update introduces a new story that is separate from the main game story progression. Once you've downloaded the update, a new portal ring appears in the final Orino's Island, and you have to go into it. You have to know where it is, and you have to go into it. Then you will unlock a different version of your Rhinos, and you get to experience this whole extra content for the new ending. And, well, in a way, it does act as sort of a rewrite of the base game's ending. It's basically an alternate reality retelling of it, in a way. Once you get into that portal, things are like more or less at the same point they were at the start of Orino's Island in the story, but things happen differently, and all that is really cool and really exciting. Conceptually, like, yeah, hell yeah, that's awesome. They're actually, redoing Orino's Island, so it's actually original and cool and filled with new content, and it's more exciting for, as an ending. But where I feel like they failed was basically the whole approach to it, because first of all, everyone's been talking about this. Twitter has been filled with people just enraged by it. The difficulty in this DLC is very imbalanced. It's a little awkward. I'm probably not, the best person to say anything about this, because I did the whole boss rush. I S-ranked pretty much everything in this game. I'm pretty decent at it, if I do say so myself. And personally, aside from the final trial, the Master King's trial, which is the one where you have to beat all the titans, again, with a very strict time limit, and you have to use the parry, and the parry is now, like, actually, fair, or not fair, because they kind of overcorrected. So remember in the base game, where the parry was bullshit long, and you could just hold it down, and you would be able to parry pretty much any attack. Now it's like 5 frames long or something. It's too short, and it's basically humanly impossible to get the timing of it if you don't practice it, like, for a really, really long time, or you just have like a particular talent for this kind of action game. It's not something most casual or even somewhat hardcore players are gonna be able to get the hang of in a reasonable amount of time. So that final King's Trial is insanely bullshit. It's too fucking difficult. I switched to easy mode, and I'm decent at this game. I'm pretty good at this game. I was actually gonna say that all the towers people have been complaining about that you have to climb, and all the other trials, I found them to be, they're challenging. They took me a few tries, but honestly, after I figured them out, they weren't that difficult. The second and third towers, I believe I did them in actually my first try, and it was pretty much fine. I've played harder games before. It didn't feel unfair. It didn't feel bullshit. It felt like very fair difficulty, and it was actually pretty satisfying to do. A lot of the combat challenges and the new Guardian bosses, they actually felt really satisfying. It made me feel like a badass to beat them on hard mode. And yeah, I was playing it on hard mode because the base game basically established that normal and easy modes are pretty much piss easy. And hard mode itself isn't that hard at all, especially with the endless parry. Pretty much every Sonic fan I know played it on hard mode, and it's the only way to unlock the end boss fight, so it was basically the standard mode for this base game. And Kishimoto and co. basically took everyone's criticism on the DLC that, oh, it's too easy, it's the base game is too freaking easy, make it harder, and actually balanced it in a way where hard mode is actually difficult, which would make sense if it wasn't incongruent with the base game, because most people came from it with hard mode on, and then suddenly hard mode is actually insanely difficult, and people aren't ready, and people want to switch to easy, switch to normal. It feels like it's just doing the whole hard mode is hard thing, which would be normal if hard mode in the base game was hard, but it isn't. It's normal. So a lot of people just rage quit or didn't realize if you switch to easy mode, things actually get easier. A lot of the platforming challenges are easier. The combat challenges give you more time to finish them. The perfect parry in the Titan boss fights becomes way more lenient. People all around assumed like the game was just too hard. And it is a huge difficulty spike, but on easy mode, personally, I don't think it's all that bad, especially for what's essentially an extra DLC, an alternate reality retelling of the ending. In a sense, you could see it like the Splatoon 2 Octo Expansion DLC, where it's, it's a new story, it's an extra update that only the hardcore fans are gonna pay attention to, and it's not necessary to enjoy the game or clear the main story. But since it's an extra thing, they can make it a little bit harder, a little bit more challenging. It's part of the draw, They just kind of failed to market it this way. And going from that point into what I want to talk about next is the ending. Because the new ending, the new final boss, is really cool. Like, the cutscenes are really cool, the music is awesome, all that is really, 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 really great. But I do have a few issues with it. I was actually having a conversation with a friend on Twitter, and we kind of like came to the same conclusion where this DLC, it only really works from a story perspective if you played the base game first and you experienced the original base game ending. A lot of the things they changed with, Sage not having to sacrifice herself and going back home with Dr. Eggman, and the vocal version of I'm With You and all that, it only really works, it only really hits if you played the original base game ending. And overall, while the new final boss is really, 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 really cool, shonen anime stuff, it's not as thematically grandiose as, fighting against the giant moon in space, at least in my opinion. Not to mention the new ending lacks the awesome monologue that the end does during its original boss fight, as well as just generally any explanation of what or who the end even is, because it just kind of assumes that you know what it is from the base game. It kind of assumes you played the base game already. And in general, the boss fight is just very janky. Sometimes the trees will go over the camera and you won't be able to see Sonic at all, and this can be a problem when you're trying to parry and stuff. And also sometimes the camera will just sort of go over the shoulder for whatever reason, and then you're supposed to like hit Supreme a few times, and after that Sonic's gonna go over Supreme's back and you're supposed to parry, but there's no visual indicator they're supposed to parry, and it's not really clear what you're supposed to do. It's just if you wait a long while, then it attacks the barrier that Sage is holding up. And I don't know what's up with that, what it's supposed to mean, and I don't know how I figured out what I was supposed to do. I was just mashing buttons, and I guess you have to parry. Not to mention that at one point you have to side loop Supreme's back, and that is not very well telegraphed. There's no way you are able to figure it out quickly. It's a matter of brute force. You have to figure it out. Oh, I'm supposed to side loop this at this point once you get its health down to 0, and it's weird. This whole boss fight feels a bit weird gameplay wise. So to me, the base game's ending story wise still remains like the main definitive end to the game's story, whereas this new ending feels more like an extra conclusion. So you get a more satisfying final boss with cooler set pieces and just a happier ending overall. And this also goes along well with the difficulty, because what I feel they actually did here was less of a correction to the base game's ending, like, oh, we're gonna fix this and make it better and make it definitive. They made an add-on. I guess you could see it sort of like how in Fire Emblem Three Houses, there are 4 different endings, but each of them is sort of not all sunshine and rainbows because of the nature of that game's story. And I remember back when that game came out, a lot of people were hoping that we would get an extra DLC with like an ultimate happy ending for everyone. And from what I understand, maybe Fire Emblem Three Hopes was that. I haven't played that one yet. I don't know, but now I'm getting off point. What I mean here is like, sort of like how people wanted there to be an ultimate ending in Fire Emblem Three Houses, where no one died and everyone was happy. I feel like this is more or less a Sonic Frontiers version of that, where, hey, Sage doesn't die anymore. You did it. You achieved the happiest ending possible. And this also extends to difficulty because it expects you to finish the base game first before doing the DLC. It even like tells you, there's a warning before you get into the giant ring. It like tells you should probably finish the base game first before going into this DLC. We do not recommend you to go to this first. You can, but even the game screams at you for doing so. So generally speaking, what this DLC functions is not as much a fix for the base game, but more of a sequel, or not an alternate reality sequel, if you will. And where I feel that kind of fails is, actually functioning as a complete ending to the game. Because now we have this ending that's more complete, but it's insanely hard. It introduces a bunch of new mechanics. And here's another thing. A lot of the reason why people are feeling confused and feeling it's too hard or too complicated, it's because the DLC kind of just doesn't explain its mechanics to you very well. When you get all the new characters, you play as Amy, you play as Knuckles, you play as Tails. They are all at level 1, and they got whole ass new skill trees. And the way you unlock skill pieces is a little bit different. You have to find the skill Coco around the map, and they're color-coded to the different characters. But the game never explains that to you. There's no tutorial, there's no re-explanation. Because it's a DLC, it all feels a little bit tacked on. And then DLC, like a free update, you can sort of feel the band-aid over the original Rhino Silence. And like them then trying to implement all these new mechanics and all these new ideas, but not really being able to do it very gracefully at all. It's all a little bit tacked on. I remember thinking, as I was playing through like the very early stages of the DLC, I remember thinking how it almost felt like a little bit fan-made. It feels like a mod. It feels like a Sonic Frontiers ending fixed mod. It actually goes ahead, it does a cooler ending, but a lot of it feels even jankier than the base game and even more poorly explained. And again, this also goes along with the difficulty and all of that. It's just kind of a weird fever dream of a DLC where, hey, the ending is better, but everything is just a little bit weird and a little bit tacked on, and it just doesn't really work smoothly as an actual ending. And what this creates is a little bit of an identity crisis for the DLC. Because now the ending, it's cooler, the final boss, it's cooler, but it loses a little bit of that emotional impact with Sage sacrificing herself in her character arc being actually completed. You miss out on listening to the amazing song I'm With You outside of the credits, which doesn't hit the same. Like, having that song in a final boss just works really well. It's really cool. It's not the same as just hearing it in the credits. It just kind of works because, hey, a vocal theme of that really good song from the base game. That's why it's exciting, not because it's on the credits. It's kind of lame that's on the credits, honestly. It's not a reworking of that fight with the end, Sonic and Sage and Supreme versus the end. It's a different version of events that works best in tandem with that original version. And to be honest, once I finished the DLC at first, and like I really like sat down and thought about it, at first I didn't really like it that much. You can see tweets. You can see kind of my character, my own personal character arc, kind of like growing into actually liking the new final boss. Because it's also very janky. By the way, another issue, another point where the game is very janky. You have to like cut a line that's connecting the end Moon with Supreme, this new Pharaoh Supreme that's actually pretty cool. And the only way to target it is by doing a very specific sequence of buttons that the game never explains to you. Actually, correction, it does explain it to you. I recently found out that if you 100% everything, every single little thing in this game, do every single conversation, do every single cyberspace, level up all the characters to max level, which takes forever, mind you. It takes too fucking long to be actually reasonable. You can talk to the Master King Coco, and it's gonna tell you, oh, you can press this button to target the power line thingy. And honestly, why did they do it like this? Did they actually expect you to 100% everything so you can know how to beat the final boss? Because I remember, like, suffering through that final boss and eventually, like, realizing what I had to do. And then, of course, appreciating all the really cool scenes. Because the scenes are cool, the cutscenes, the music, it's all really thematically, it's awesome. It's really badass. But I sat down and I realized, this is really not as impactful as the base game's ending, is it? You don't get to learn a lot about the end. You miss out on that whole cool-ass monologue. Sage's character arc feels a little bit undermined. It's kind of like brushed away at the side just because, you know, she's alive now. And in general, it just felt a little bit less thematically complete. Like it was actually part of the full story. It feels cooler. It feels more climactic, sure. But you can still feel that there's something missing. And when taking it as its own complete ending, it feels like there's something missing. This actually reminds me a lot of Pokemon Sun and Moon, and how that had Ultra Sun and Moon, which are better versions of those games, but they changed so many little things about the story. And, like, they add a lot of cool stuff. But similarly to Sonic Frontiers, they actually add a really cool new badass final boss. But it changes a lot of the story, so it only really becomes good when taken in as an alternate retelling of it rather than a substitute. Like as the definitive version for it. I feel like Sonic Frontiers does a lot of the same things where it just changes a lot of stuff to be different, but ultimately makes a less interesting complete package for the sake of making a cooler final boss. It only really works if you do the specific sequence of things. Okay, so first off, do the base game, play it on hard mode, do speed style controls, and turn on all the settings that enable like momentum physics and stuff that were added in the later update. Then finish that on hard mode, then you go back, you switch to easy mode if you're reasonable, and then you go into the DLC, do all of that, and then you finish the game for real. Additionally, if you want to do all the boss rush stuff to unlock the power boost in the cyberspace stages, that's also recommended. That I would recommend doing in between the base game and the DLC. And you see how this suddenly became a flowchart that shows you the best possible way to experience Sonic Frontiers, so you don't miss out on anything story-wise, you don't miss out on anything gameplay-wise, and you get the best possible complete experience. Basically, do the base game, and if you're feeling like you're missing out on something, you feel like this ending didn't really quite hit, because it doesn't really quite hit. Genuinely, it's not that complete. We all know that. Then you go into the DLC so you can claim your destiny. You can make a cooler ending for yourself, and you have to face a very difficult challenge in the sense that the DLC itself is very difficult, so you can achieve it. As a bonus thing, this DLC works really well because it's optional, and it's just a way for you to get like the best possible finale where no one dies, and you save the day for real, for real. So, as I mentioned before, this truly feels like the DLC here is sort of going through a bit of an identity crisis. It doesn't know if it wants to be affixed to the ending, as in, you go to the final boss and suddenly Supreme or the end has a new phase, and then you do that and boom, the end is basically the same. Aside from that, it's just you get a more climactic final boss, which would have been acceptable since this is a free update. Honestly, I might have preferred that. Like maybe they added a third phase to the end boss fight where you actually fight it in like 3D beyond the little stupid minigame you do. Instead, they went ahead and did a whole ass DLC expansion that, for whatever reason, is free. They added new characters, they added an entirely revised Final Island, which is amazing. Like, they really did not need to do that. But in this case, this would be more of a Splatoon Unlocked expansion situation, where, you know, it's a DLC, it's extra content, so they can justify it being hard with like, oh, it's optional extra DLC for master players. But this is still a rewrite of the base ending, which ultimately means that despite trying to tell the same ending twice, there's no definitive ending to the story, to this game. Each of the endings feels like it's lacking something the other has. The original base game ending, despite being cool thematically, still kind of sucks. it's still in the game and can still play it. And for a lot of people, that's gonna be it. That's gonna be the ending. You need to know that there's an extra story to go ahead and do it. And even then, that extra story doesn't work fully as an ending either. So it's not like they fixed anything. They just added more stuff on top of it. And that more stuff isn't very polished either. It's better, sure, but it's still not complete. You're missing out on a lot of important content if you don't do the base game's ending. And honestly, that's kind of frustrating because I was hoping that it would just be able to share around this game and be like, okay, so once you get to the final island, access the DLC and do that instead because that has a better ending. But it really doesn't work. It does not work. I would still recommend doing the base game, experiencing all of that, so when you do the DLC, the new stuff hits harder and you get a more complete package that way. Because it really, really, really doesn't work if you just do the new DLC. It's not meant to be played this way. And I really wish that wasn't the case because now we have kind of an uneven experience where, okay, this is still one of my favorite games of all time for all the highs it achieves, but since the whole DLC and stuff is just a huge band-aid over the messy base game, I have to wave my arms around and explain how to play this game to anyone who isn't familiar with it, just so they can have the best possible experience. And that's not how you make a complete game, Sega. That's just not it. What's craziest about this, in the end, is that despite all of this that I've said, this DLC was still a blast to play through for the most part. I kind of forgot to mention the new characters, but once you unlock some of their skills, because at first they really are weird to play as and you need to figure out how to level them up, but once you level them up, they're all super fun to play. I especially loved playing as Tails with the Cyclone, his plane coming back from Adventure 2. That was amazing. It was super cool and super fun to play as. You can absolutely break the game with it. You can absolutely break the game with all of these new characters, really. But it's in a way where it's actually fun, where like you have to explore the character's abilities to figure out new ways to reach difficult spots in the map in ways that probably weren't intended. And that's always really fun, in my opinion. And I keep rethinking about that final boss, and the more I think about it, the more I start to like it. When I first played it, as I mentioned, I was a little disappointed because it doesn't really work as a standalone ending aside from the original. But despite all of this new final boss is so cool. The new form, the new battle against Supreme, it's all so awesome. The new version of I'm here, the new version of I'm with you for the credits, despite, again, being the credits, which is kind of lame. It's still all so cool, and you can feel the passion, and I feel the passion, and I'm excited. I feel excited talking and thinking about it. I had the opportunity to share some moments of this final boss with a friend of mine who isn't that into Sonic, and just be able to express how cool it is and to be able to talk about it with someone else. Maybe remember how good it feels to be excited over something like this, to be so giddy and sharing all my interests in things I'm excited about with other people. And despite feeling so frustrated at this final boss, it still managed to make me feel like this, which is an achievement in of itself. And let's be real, would it still be Sonic Frontiers if it didn't have a few very big issues that are gonna haunt me for the rest of time, even though the game itself is kind of generally amazing to me?